Are we on? Call the meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Mr. Montplaisir?
Here.
Mr. Bennett? Mr. Costin?
Here.
Ms. Johnson? Ms. Wagner? Here. Mr. Jacobson?
Here.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Here.
Mr. Steen?
Here.
Mr. Garrick? Mr. Redlinger? Dr. Mahoney? Mr. Grinberg?
All that, we still have a quorum. Changes to the agenda. There is one item that was passed out, was not in your packet. Executive Director Contracting Recommendation. I suggest we put that as 9A. Any other changes to the agenda? Hearing none, we'll go with that. Next item, approval of the minutes. We'll have a chance to look at the minutes. Looking for a motion.
So moved.
A motion, a second? Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Minutes are approved. Approval of the bills. Kent, you usually do this?
Yeah, I normally go through those. $149,566 to be approved. The lion's share of those are legal costs and a $47,000 $100 to the Cass Joint Water District. And so nothing unusual in light of where we're at today.
Any questions of Kent or a motion?
This might be kibbles and bits perhaps, but I noticed on the Cass Joint Water District, there's a whole bunch of water connection services to Cass Rural Water. Are those for houses and places that have been abandoned that still have, wouldn't the water be shut off? So in other words, why would we be paying Cass Rural Water users for services when the houses are gone?
I think we have to take over the membership. And some of those maybe are rentals, but we have to.
So, yeah, so I'm just curious, if it's a membership thing, I guess I understand that, but if it's actually water services, it would seem like they should be disconnected.
We do have a number of rural properties that are still occupied,
Okay.
that we've owned, and there's some technical work being done right now to get ready to remove or demo these structures when the timing is right. But in the meantime, we have ownership of a handful of rural properties. A few of them have occupants, but several do not.
And the only reason I ask is because I don't recall seeing those before on the bills listing anywhere. So I'm just curious as to why they'd show up now. And maybe we could just refer that question on to Cass Joint Water for an explanation.
Okay, any other questions on the bills? Or a motion?
Move to approve.
Have a motion, is there a second?
Second?
A second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Financial report, Kent.
Yeah, if you refer to page 14, the cumulative expenses for 2018 are $30,606,434. And on a cumulative basis, project to date is $446,447,047. And as you'll see, because of the state we're in, the revenues of $525 million cumulative are exceeding the expenses considerably, just due to the fact that the revenues are accumulating in the fund balance, which leads me to page 15 with the net position of $79,007,520. No unusual items to note there. And the rest is a continuum of detail with regard to funds dispersed for the month and the cumulative vendors and the lands support. And I don't have specific questions about that. I must say kudos to my staff, if that's appropriate for me to give kudos to my own staff. I don't do that, a lot of this work. One of our members has been out on maternity leave for the last 12 weeks, and staff have substituted relatively seamlessly here, so we're continuing to provide the data that we have in the past, and I'm pleased to say that didn't seem to be a struggle. So I just wanted to recognize them correctly.
Okay. Any questions for Kent on that? Kent, I have one question, and I've asked this question before as well, but on page 16, so we have total appropriations, and I understand, the approved budget, and then we have outstanding encumbrances, 40,631,000. And those are basically, I think on page 22, the total there, for 40,631,000. I mean, I'm assuming it's the same number. Tracking with me on page 22.
Yes, and
Okay. And so those, but are those total encumbrances for, was that just the current year budget encumbrances, or is this like the next several years? I've always struggled with that a little bit.
yeah, no, I believe that the current obligations are for contracted obligations that are outstanding. The big swag in that whole equation would be land acquisition, and it may be that our budgets were set so large initially. I think there's some attempt at estimating the land acquisitions, and that's shown as an encumbrance, even though it takes a while to work through the land process. Eric, you might be able to help me there, but because obviously there's an ongoing obligation to acquire land, and I think that was trying to show some reasonable estimate of that. So other than that, to answer your question directly, those are contract obligations and other things that have been committed to by them. The land acquisition, I think, is merely an estimate.
But it goes beyond the end of the year.
It does. So this is more than a one-year number, and that's what I always
Yeah,
question.
okay.
So it's like we
Yep.
show a budget number for the fiscal year 82 million, included in that's 40 million of encumbrances, but those 40 million are going to be spent way beyond 2018.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you for that clarification.
Right, that answers that. Anything else, Kent?
No, that's all. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for Kent? Do we approve this, or just accept it? We end up
I
doing,
think we have, haven't we?
have we been
It's
approving?
about half and half.
Half, and that's why I get confused. Well, let's take a motion to approve the financial report. Get a motion?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those, should we take a roll call on that? Roll call on that.
Mr. Montplaisir?
Yes.
Mr. Costin?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yep. Sorry.
Ms. Wagner?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson?
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger? He's not. Oh, never mind.
Absent.
Yep.
All right, thank you. Moving on to the next item, PMC report. I think Martin's going to be doing this versus Robert today.
Mr. Chairman, start on page 32. This is the typical set of graphics tables with respect to the overall program status on page 33, showing your program budget in 2015 dollars of $2.2 billion, actual cost to date $439,494,217, with a remaining program budget of $1,766,071,827. The level 2 detail, which provides line item detail for the costs that are in the overall program status, are on the following pages and provide the detail for those totals. Following on page 37 is your FY 2018 cash budget. We will have a discussion in a later agenda item on the adjustments to that budget for 2018 as requested, but based on the approved budget and the amounts paid to date, the remaining fiscal year budget is $51,947,958 out of your approved $82,554,394, showing $30,606,436 paid. And again, following that page, starting on page 38, is the level 2 detail that makes up those numbers.
All right. Any questions for Martin? Either of those budget worksheets? I think we just accept that, I think. Okay. Let's file and accept that report. Unless there's any other questions. All right, Moving on to number 6 on the agenda, financial audit. About maybe a little over a year ago, it came up in the Finance Committee, we should start thinking about an audit for the Diversion Authority. And Ken and I had just a brief discussion yesterday, now that a year's gone by, and talked about how we should proceed with that. And I asked Kent just to give us some thoughts and information on that, as the city basically does most of the records for Diversion Authority, are responsible for them. I thought I'd have Kent just introduce that topic and tell us, give us your thoughts and where we should maybe head on with this.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Steen. With regard to the audit, I think we have some options, and I think if I recollect back to a year ago when we talked about this, there seemed to be some idea of waiting until we had a staff and had a director and had an organizational structure, and we do have a corporate structure, but all the revenues are either flowing into Cass County or into the city, and then they're being ported into the Diversion Authority. So, long story short, it's a different type of organizational structure. That certainly doesn't make it incapable of being audited, but the question gets to be, if we're not producing accrual-based financial statements, that we're just doing cash in, cash out type activities, what level of audit activities would we be seeking, and what level of work would we desire? And is this considered a financial audit per se because our financial statements aren't in a normal fashion, or would they just be agreed upon procedures where we would say, has a diversion collected the appropriate amount of sales tax from each of the two entities? Have the contracting actions been approved by the governing board? Has there been an appropriate level of authority? Those types of things, and just on a test basis to have an auditor come in and look at that. Is there substantiation for the expenditures that we've made? Is there records on file in the fiscal agent, i.e. the City of Fargo's office, to reflect that it's properly supported? Those would all be things that could be subject to part of that audit process. So I guess I'd be willing to entertain a discussion with our auditor. Right now, the City of Fargo has approved Eide Bailey for the next 3 years, actually, and they do audit a subset of the money that flows through the city's accounts and ultimately to the diversion. So but again, that isn't auditing the expenditures of the diversion per se. So it's kind of an open opportunity. At what level of audit do you want? One idea would be to bring the audit partner in to sit down and have a discussion about, what would they generally recommend in light of our corporate structure and our joint powers agreements and the relationships we all have. We're using the joint water district. It would seem like there should be some level of scrutiny with that as well, that we hand off to a third party to make a whole bunch of payments. They're being reimbursed as well. And I don't know whether those should be audited at that agency level, or if they should be audited ultimately when we pay the bill and get the documentation from the joint water district. So those are some questions that are kind of bouncing around in my head, and I guess I'd open it up for any type of feedback that the auditors and the finance people are thinking might be appropriate.
There's a question just to follow up from our recent discussion. But at this point in time, we're doing a cash in, cash out type of an accounting.
Correct.
Everything's getting, I'll call it expended. At what point in time, and Mike, obviously you're fully aware of how this works too, at what point in time would the authority be expected to actually prepare accrual-based financial statements, if ever? And I have no idea what the answer to that is.
I don't know when the appropriate time would be, but at some point, they're going to have their own structure, they're going to have their own staff, they're going to have their own accounting system. And of course, at that time, they're going to be preparing regular financial statements. Right now, an audit, of course, is designed to give an opinion on their financial statements. And as such, we really don't have financial statements. We have some, as Kent mentioned, cash in, cash out statements is about it. That's not to say some procedures couldn't be done. Is the county remitting the agreed upon sales tax?
And I think, as you know, at the city level, and I don't know if these are reviewed by the audit, your current auditors or not, are the expenditures that the city makes, supported by the appropriate level of documentation and evidence, that type of thing? We all think yes, but, that's part of what an audit does, and there's a lot of money flowing through here. The other piece of it, if they are expected, I think, to make, at some point in time, regular accrual-based financial statements, there's this whole issue of all these prior expenditures now totaling almost $450 million, that if most of those, I'm assuming, would be capitalized, not all at most. And then you have, to go back and recreate and review all the documentation so that it actually flows into the financial statements on a historic basis. That's going to take time, and I don't know if you want to wait to the end to do that. So I think that goes back, in my mind, kind of goes back to that agreed upon procedures discussion that we talked about. There's going to be things done, you don't issue an opinion on these, but you do the work necessary to go forward, and, so it's not all at one time. That's just a thought of mine.
Yeah, and I think those things can be accomplished. We're going to have to direct them to do what you want to do. And I would suggest perhaps a subcommittee of this group could meet with the lead audit partner and just hammer out whether we want to just do some agreed upon procedures. I think that might be appropriate. We're not under any federal audit guidelines where the pay estimates from the state are being scrutinized at a very detailed level. They make us hand off a tremendous amount of data as fiscal agent to get these reimbursements from the state. So they're looking through that in great detail. And so basically, it's whatever's been expended of that 447 million are these appropriate level of expenditures, and are they supported? To me, those are the two main questions. Obviously, the approval process is a big part of that, internal control as well. But
Mike, anything to add to that?
Well, the biggest struggle I see is how do we come up with fixed asset records in that the Joint Water Resource District owns a lot of property, the city owns a lot of property. We've put a lot of other things, besides buying land, we've put a lot of other costs into there that you wouldn't normally think is part of the land, but it is. So to me, that's going to be a real struggle, right? Who owns what?
I think, in going along with Ken's thought, and we talked about this earlier, but it seems to me, at least trying to get some information in front of this committee. The finance committee, typically for any entity, one of their primary responsibilities is the suitability of the financial records and statements, and that type of thing. And I would, like to propose that a committee that would meet with the city's auditors, would include Kent, Mike, and myself. All three have a little bit of a financial background in areas of audit and that type of thing, but that's just the thought. At least we could get all on the same page and get the, I don't know what you guys think about that.
I think we should add our Minnesota brethren to the group.
Okay.
They're willful participants in this discussion.
So we have almost a whole committee, and that's fine. And I have no problem with that, but at least get started so we have some discussion. They're all pointing at Lori. But at least to do that, because well, the worst thing I think we could do is wait until, now we need an audit, and you got to go back 7 years to figure out the information. That's probably not a good approach. We're already having to go back how many years? Too many. And so that would.
Yeah, and just know and understand too that we've spent significant amount of money on our program management system. The AConnect system, that's an Oracle product, I think now, has an extensive workflow documentation. And then we'd have all of the documents scanned and imaged and indexed so they're retrievable instantly off of our Laserfish document management system. So it's not difficult. It's just a matter of how much work do you want to deploy with the audit group, and that's determined based upon the size and scope of the audit procedures. So I think some is appropriate. We can discern what that should be.
If you want to call that an audit committee of the finance group, I'm okay with that too, but, Tony's not here, I'd like him to weigh in on that, but I think we should move forward with that discussion and try to set something in motion. Obviously, this year's too late probably a little bit too late to say we're going to want an audit this year. It really doesn't make a lot of sense because we don't have those financial statements per se. So start with some agreed upon procedures going forward, it seems to make sense. That sense? Oh. Martin?
Mr. Chair, just a, excuse me, a comment. The PPA that you signed with the Corps of Engineers does have some audit provisions. They are pretty innocuous in that they have the right to audit the project for the applicability, allocability, and appropriateness of the costs. So whatever efforts you undertake, you might want to look at that language and ensure whatever you do
That'd be great.
satisfies that.
Okay. Right. So unless there's any objection, let's just forward the discussion to Tony and as chair of the finance committee and see what his thoughts are. Make sense? And I heard you were willing to serve on that committee if that comes to be. Thank
I
you.
used to be a state auditor,
No
so
worry.
I do have a little bit of history.
Okay, all right, perfect. All right, that was it for the audit. 2018 adjusted budget, and I think, Martin, you handed out an updated
Yes.
worksheets compared to what was actually in the email, so I want to focus on the updated.
So I've been, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, I've been chastised for the eye test, but I'll try to get bigger printouts for tomorrow. There are two handouts. They're slightly different. It is, the first is the handout with the gray columns on the right and the blue columns in the center. That is the sheet that shows the proposed revisions by line item to the 2018 cash budget. Those revisions zero out at the bottom, so there is no change in the total budget, but just in the line items that you can see with respect to remaining an $82,554,394 budget. With the cost to date, you would have remaining fiscal year $54,076,015, and that remains unchanged. One of the items that we were asked to provide at the last Finance Committee meeting, said we'd come back at this meeting, is an estimate to complete for 2018. That is the second handout, which is even a smaller eye test, or greater one. And the first three columns are the same as what you saw in the last handout. The center section is really what has been paid through 31st August 2018, approximately $28,478,379. The estimate to complete September through December, you can see by line item, and amounts to about $10,661,799, and the total expenditures are in the next column. The last two columns then look at the balance of the budget unchanged and the balance on the budget if it would be changed by line item. Obviously, again, at the total line, nothing is different because we're not changing the total budget. A couple comments that were raised earlier. You'll notice there's a fairly large unexpended amount for FY 2018 on the in-town flood protection line, and it's probably worth noting that that was budgeted not knowing at the time whether the funds that the city of Fargo had for bond proceeds was adequate to cover those costs, and it was for this year. The adjustment that we made between your packet and this one is there's about $2.8 million worth of complementary in-town flood protection that will be done in 2018 that will be transferred over to the Diversion Authority books. So that is shown on the following page, which is the detail that goes into the line items for each of those. So happy to answer questions about that, and would, I believe this is for your approval and recommendation to the board.
All right, questions for Martin? I know I have some, but I'll wait. Until now. So, the budget, the remaining budget for 18 would be, by the time we're done with 18, would be 43,414,000, is that correct? What we expect to,
The total expenditures would be in the third column from the right, 39,141,000 approximately. That would be the expenditures in 2018. The 43,414,000 is the
The balance.
difference, just the balance between.
unexpended budget.
Unexpended from the 82,554.
All right. And that compares the original budget of the 82 million.
Correct.
Okay.
I believe as we were directed, we weren't looking to change the 2018 budget in total, but rather adjust the line items to reflect what was spent on each line item.
And the reasoning for asking Martin to do this is when we sat down on a smaller working group of the finance committee, it was Tony and me and Mike, and said, well, what are we really gonna spend? I mean, we've got this budget that says 82 million, we've got so many million left over, what are we really gonna spend by the time we're done with fiscal 18? So we wanted to kind of understand that, and the reason for that is what we want to do, the next piece of this introduction, is we want to put together the 2019 budget. Well, the 2019 budget in and of itself is, we don't know, because we don't know if we've got a permit, we don't know the start date, we don't know what all the ramifications, and so what we're proposing to do is, again, it's coming up and be introducing that as well, but just do for 19, just do a first quarter budget for 2019. Even if we have a permit and everything else, we're still gonna have certain things we're going to be doing, but we have no idea what the rest of the year holds. The diversion authority until we get the timing down, the permit down, the what-ifs, whereas, and all that type of thing. And so that's the proposal. So we want to know, okay, what's left of the 18 budget that may in fact flow over into the 19 budget? And a big part of this is land acquisition, where we move with that and that type of thing. And so that's the reasoning for this. I mean, it really, how can I say this? It doesn't change anything other than figuring out where we're going to spend the money and how, and what the timing is. That's why I look at it. But Martin, if you want to add to that, or Mike?
Well, I think the other discussion that ensued in that strategy was that it did not predispose the outcome of the permit. And so looking at a first quarter budget that didn't predispose the outcome of that process was what was the desire of the Finance Committee and the Board. We would probably also be preparing in parallel a stand-up budget at some point post-permit receival and environmental approval that you could consider on a ramp-up basis. But rather than going at that guessing, we prepare that after the permit was known and the environmental approval approved.
Actually, Martin just made the comment I was going to make. We're certainly going to be working in the background just for the committee and board's benefit on what that proper stand-up budget will look like. We'll have board transitions on January 1. We'll have new elected officials join the board. And so I think it's a good opportunity as well to get the committee briefed up as well as the board about where we stand and where we're going in the 2019 work products and in 2020. Because I mean, by then we'll have much more certainty. I think we'll have a greater degree of confidence to be able to put a more robust number in front of you. And we're really working hard, both on the land side as well as the professional services side, to make sure we get those pieces figured out.
Chuck?
Thank you. So who involved this 2019 budget plan? Who was on that?
2018?
2019.
19. Well, that was just it's a concept to bring to this committee to say, are we comfortable with recommending to the board after for 2019, we just do a quarter budget because we don't know. Otherwise, it's going to end up like the 18 budget. We budget 82 million and we spend less than half of that. And so let's do something that makes more sense that we can manage. And so the budget hasn't been prepared for 2019 quarterly. It hasn't been done, but because before we're going to do that, we want to make sure the Finance Committee is comfortable with the approach, make a recommendation to the board, because I think there's supposed to be actually a budget presented to the board in November?
Actually,
October?
even before that, we're really right at that time, right here and right now. If not for the injunction, if not for this permit application, we would be looking at a full, robust budget, the real budget for 2019, right here and right now. But since we can't do that, I think Commissioner Rindberg and certainly Rick, I think, had the perspective that at least trying to make a placeholder is better than doing nothing and then just punting on it entirely until the middle of 19. We try at least to have a placeholder. So we're a bit out of step that way, but that really is just a function of where we're at right now with the permit process.
It's the first quarter.
That first quarter. That make, I mean, is that Makes sense, because otherwise, what happened last year, the questions last year, we said, well, we're going to prepare a budget as if we're just going to get this thing going along and we're going to do it all year long. Well, when we've never gone back to really address that until now, so, well, we're not going to spend 80 million, we're going to spend, 39 million. But the point is if we have a budget, that budget, the $82 million budget, should have given us some direction. When do we have to borrow additional funds? How much funds do we have available? When do we have to do short-term financing? And of course, none of that occurred because we weren't spending money. We've got 80 million in the bank or thereabouts we haven't spent. And so we've got money from the state still coming in December we haven't spent. And so we've got all sorts of things that the budget really should give us some type of timing. If we throw another budget out there for 19, for the whole year, and we don't go back and readdress it if there's some changes, which would just be an exercise at that point in time, again, we're not going to have a whole lot of idea all these timing issues out there. So that was really what kind of drove the recommendation. Just let's do a quarter, we know it's going to change, because we don't know when it's going to change to.
And at the same time, also not get into such detail right in the middle of a permit process to create any kind of problems or confusion with the permitting agency in Minnesota, just to say, we will address those issues when we get a permit, but we're not going to prejudice or presuppose anything that we're going to have that. Let's just kind of keep that detail to the future event.
But you called it right, it's a placeholder.
Yeah,
Just,
it's a placeholder.
okay,
Yep.
thanks.
Any other questions? So I think we probably need two actions here. One is to recommend approval of the 2018 adjusted budget to the board. If there's any questions on that, let's take those now, otherwise maybe a motion, and we'll recommend approval to the board for that. But again, any questions would be welcome as well.
On that adjusted budget, are you talking just realigning the line items or reducing the amount?
Well, I think the information's here, and I don't know for sure exactly what the best approach would be, and I'll look to Kent and Mike for that. We know what the numbers should be, it's at 39 million, basically. Do we want to adjust the total amount, or we just accept the fact that this is where we're going to end up? We're going to be, 40-some million short of what we originally budgeted. That's
That's really the question.
Yeah, so, I don't think it makes a whole lot of difference, otherwise it's just information for the board, one way or the other. Personally, I don't think it'd make a lot of sense to change the actual budget and reduce it. But it could, I just don't know all the answers.
Well, I think that the PMC has provided the information we requested is, what are we going to spend between now and the end of the year? They provided $10 million, that seems reasonable, and it's clearly well under the original budget, so I would just suggest whatever's provided right here is adequate. Otherwise, we're just window dressing after the fact, and that doesn't accomplish much of anything.
Right.
It's the bottom line that counts. So I'd suggest we approve this as presented.
By realigning the line items
Yeah,
and leaving the total alone?
Yeah.
I'd second that.
motion and a second. Any questions on the motion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Montplaisir?
Yes.
Mr. Costin?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Wagner?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson?
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Yes,
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger?
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes. The next item would be 8, and that's really just a recommendation, approve a recommendation to the board that the 19 budget at this point in time would only include the first quarter.
so moved.
Motion
Second.
and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Montplaisir?
Yes.
Mr. Costin?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Wagner?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson?
Yes.
Mr. Hendrickson?
Yes,
Mr. Steen?
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger?
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you. We're on to 9, other business contracting approval, and I'm not sure who's taking this item. Mike?
This,
Martin? Robert?
Yeah, it,
Somebody.
This is the HMG task order amendment to cover services during construction for the recently awarded work package 42E pump station. I don't have the amount on the top of my head.
777-864.
777-864.
I would just add, we had quite a bit of internal staff discussion about this one, and it is timely. It is something that is ready for authorization. Definitely, this is one that runs through finance and the board for awareness, and Can't speak for Robert, but I think we felt comfortable with the work, having gone through the scope, and concurred with John Glassmeyer's assessment as well from the PMC perspective, that it all seemed reasonable.
Any questions on the information? And is there a motion to recommend approval?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
A second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Montplaisir?
Yes.
Mr. Costin?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Wagner?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson? Mr. Hendrickson?
Yes.
Mr. Steen?
Yes,
Mr. Redlinger?
Yes.
motion passes. Next meeting, I'm not sure we got the right date for the next meeting. Correct?
Correct.
It's the 20...
So a question to the committee was, excuse me, the board meeting is going to move to the 29th of November, I believe.
Yes.
And so the question was if we wanted to commensurately move the Land Management, Finance Committee, Outreach Committee the day before that on 28th. So it's the week after Thanksgiving, and it would just align the committee meetings to the board.
Just a note on that, the Outreach Committee met earlier today, and they agreed with moving their meeting to the 28th, and I did talk with the Chair of the Land Committee, and she also agreed to move the Land Committee to the 28th, so not to put any more pressure on you, but just so you know.
Any objection to moving the meeting to the 28th?
So moved.
Hearing none, we got a motion and approved. Good, there you go. Next, someone should let Tony know. Point in time, but that'd be good. All right. Any other business?
So just, while we were here, I looked up these businesses for the Casserole water charges. They all are recently acquired properties by the joint board. Some of these had been, we had a purchase agreement in place, and it just took a while to get to the closing. And so just, we can do a little bit more diligence on why we're paying for it now, but I suspect it's because we recently took ownership in the past few months.
Thank you.
Any other business or comments? Hearing none, motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.